Air inside the Osayande mansion buzzed with celebration. Chandeliers dripped with diamonds. The floor gleamed like polished obsidian, and Lagos's elites sipped champagne beside fountains that spouted imported rosewater. At the center stood Chief Osayande, billionaire oil magnate, feared business tycoon, and patriarch of the most powerful family in Nigeria's petroleum industry. He raised his glass with pride as cameras captured his birthday toast, while beside him stood his pride and joy, his daughter, Amaka Osayande, a radiant beauty in her late 20s with poise, education, and ambition to rival any heir in the country. But the celebration ended in chaos. In the middle of the party, Amaka took the microphone and introduced the man she planned to marry. Not a senator's son, not a CEO, but Yuzor, a struggling street artist with paint-stained hands and dreams carved in poverty. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her father's face darkened with humiliation. "A painter!" Chief Osayande thundered. "Do you know who you are? You carry the Osayande blood." Amaka's voice trembled but didn't waver. "And I choose love over your empire," she said. That was the last time she ever stepped foot in her father's house. He disowned her before the night ended. The next morning, every joint account was frozen, her photos were removed from the family website, and her name was erased from the will. She left the mansion with Yuzor in a single suitcase. Amaka traded luxury for love, but the transition was anything but romantic. The small apartment Yuzor rented in Yaba was barely larger than the pantry in her father's estate. The walls were cracked, water leaked from the ceiling during storms, and the only furniture was a second-hand mattress and a rickety table he used for painting. Still, Amaka woke up each morning beside Yuzor with a strange kind of peace. He made her laugh when things got too hard. He painted her portrait in the afternoons with eyes full of wonder, as if she were a masterpiece. And for a time, that was enough. But reality crept in slowly. Her designer clothes didn't fit this new life. Neighbors whispered about the billionaire's daughter who married a broke man. Jobs were hard to find. No company wanted the drama of hiring the estranged daughter of Chief Osayande, especially not after his public statement calling her the greatest disappointment of his life. Still, Amaka persevered. She used her degree in petroleum economics to freelance for small firms, even helping Yuzor set up a street exhibition in Surulere. They weren't wealthy, but they built a modest life on mutual respect and shared struggle. One evening, Yuzor returned from a gallery meeting, shoulders slumped. "They want to feature my work, but only if I remove your name from the story behind the paintings." Amaka laughed bitterly. Even in exile, her father's shadow reached them, but she looked him in the eyes and said, "Let them keep their gallery. You paint for yourself, not their approval." That night, they ate boiled yam and sauce by candlelight, and Yuzor kissed her hand like she was still royalty. She was, just not the kind the world respected. 5 years passed. Amaka and Yuzor's life was a quiet rhythm. Simple, sometimes hard, but full of love. Yuzor's art gained recognition in underground circles. He wasn't rich, but he had dignity. Meanwhile, Amaka had grown into something sharper than her former self. She no longer longed for ballrooms or designer gowns. She consulted for startups and taught young girls in Machin about financial literacy and self-worth. She learned to live without approval. But not everything was peaceful. Yuzor's health began to decline. He had constant headaches and soon seizures. The government hospital in Ikeja was overwhelmed, and the tests they could afford gave no answers. Amaka watched the love of her life fade in her arms, helpless. She wanted to scream at the world that had taken everything from them, but she didn't. She simply held him, fed him, and worked harder. She sold her wedding ring to buy his medication. One evening, Yuzor looked at her with watery eyes and whispered, "Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll never crawl back to that man." She smiled through her tears and said, "I'll never kneel to him, Yuzor. Never." But fate had its own plans. At the Osayande Group headquarters, chaos reigned. Whispers of fraud investigations flooded the news. Several high-ranking executives had been arrested. Millions had vanished from offshore accounts. The Nigerian Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, was closing in. Investors were pulling out, and the once mighty oil empire teetered on the edge of collapse. Chief Osayande, now older, grayer and weaker, sat in his high-rise office, breathing through an oxygen machine. His board members had deserted him. His sons, once hailed as heirs, had proven incompetent. And the real irony? The only person who could decode the company's complex risk management system was Amaka. She had built it quietly during her years in exile as a consultant. Her name wasn't on the documents, but her signature style of economic restructuring was unmistakable. His lawyer, Barrister Ed Nuga, laid the facts bare. "Sir, without her, your empire will fall. You need Amaka." The chief scowled. "That girl spat on my name." But even he knew it. His throne was cursed, and only she could lift it. Amaka returned from the clinic to find a black car parked in front of her apartment. A suited man stepped out and handed her a sealed envelope with her father's crest. She didn't open it immediately. She sat beside Yuzor's hospital bed and watched his chest rise and fall. Inside the envelope was a plea, a formal letter requesting her strategic expertise to salvage the crumbling Osayande empire. The phrasing was cold, businesslike, but it ended with 4 desperate words: "Your father needs you." She stared at the letter all night. Yuzor, weak but lucid, opened one eye and whispered, "You don't owe him anything." Amaka nodded. "I know, but maybe I owe myself something." The next morning, she called the number in the letter. "I'll come," she said, "but on my terms." Her return to the Osayande Towers was the stuff of headlines. Social media exploded. "Disowned daughter returns to save empire" was trending across Nigerian Twitter. She wore a simple black suit, no makeup, no jewelry. Her hair was in a tight bun. Her eyes were fire. The boardroom was packed. Her father was absent, but his minions were not. They whispered as she entered, some scoffing, others afraid. She spread out her files and spoke like a commander. "You don't need to like me. You need to listen. If you don't want to lose your jobs and your offshore homes, I suggest you follow my lead." The CFO raised a hand. "And what gives you the right?" She cut him off with a cold smile. "I designed the system your analysts use. You thought it was some random consultant named MSC. That was me." The room went silent. Power had returned, but it wore a new face. She found her father in the private ward at Lagoon Hospital. He looked like a shell of the man who once ruled oil blocks and crushed rivals. Tubes snaked into his arms, and his once booming voice was now a whisper. He looked at her with misty eyes. "You came." She didn't answer. She just stood there unreadable. "They said only you can save us," he added, voice cracking. Amaka leaned in. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for every staffer who'll lose their job if this ship sinks. I'm here for the workers who have kids in school and no other lifeline. I'll fix what you broke, but don't mistake it for forgiveness." He nodded weakly. "I never expected it." A tear rolled down his cheek. She didn't wipe it. Amaka took control like a general in a battlefield. She demanded full access to all financial records, emails, and shell companies. Her first action was to fire 2 corrupt executives and freeze suspicious accounts. The media dubbed her the Iron Heiress. Her father's allies tried to sabotage her. Anonymous threats arrived in her inbox. A fake scandal was released, accusing her of laundering money. But Amaka held her ground. She responded with data, audits, and legal force. Meanwhile, Yuzor's condition worsened. She flew back and forth between boardrooms and hospitals, balancing corporate war and personal tragedy. One night in her office, she wept quietly. "Why must I always fight to exist?" she whispered. But she wiped her tears and kept going. Her dignity began to erode under corporate pressure. She was forced to attend a gala hosted by corrupt oil lobbyists. A man who once mocked her on live television now kissed her hand in public. It made her skin crawl. One of the terms of her return was that she wouldn't live in the family mansion, but the board insisted she at least appear to reconcile with her father. So she attended a press event, standing beside him and smiling. Cameras flashed, but behind that smile was fury. Later that night, her father said, "Thank you." She turned to him and replied, "Don't. You're not the reason I'm standing." While reviewing documents, Amaka stumbled upon an old folder labeled Project Iomide. It was a report about a woman her father had pushed out of the company years ago. A whistleblower, a good woman. She realized that her father's crimes stretched deeper than just fraud. There had been cover-ups, deaths, ruined lives. He had sacrificed countless innocents to build his empire. Suddenly, saving the company didn't feel noble anymore. It felt dirty. She closed the file and cried for all the people her family had destroyed. The EFCC office in Ikoyi smelled like toner and old fear. Amaka sat across from two investigators whose faces were carved into neutrality. They slid a folder toward her, dozens of emails, bank trails, and contracts that could bury a dynasty. "We believe you can help us connect these threads," the lead investigator said. "In exchange, we'll shield you from any fallout and keep your name out of the headlines." The words were neat, tempting, and dangerous. Cooperation meant betraying the father who had betrayed her. Refusal meant leaving thousands of employees exposed to the collapse of a company she could still salvage. She asked for time and a pen. On a yellow notepad, she sketched a flowchart from memory: subsidiaries feeding ghost vendors, logistics contracts priced twice the market rate, and a Bermuda-based research fund that bled money each quarter, right before tax filings. She didn't hand the page over. Not yet. "If I do this," she said, voice steady, "I need 3 things. Whistleblower status for any internal staff who help me. Prosecutorial focus on the actual architects of fraud, not just the figureheads. And absolute protection for our workforce while we restructure." The investigator studied her with new respect. "You're negotiating with law enforcement." Amaka held his gaze. "I'm protecting people." When she finally slid the page across, the deal was inked. Not in signatures, but in the kind of silence that means everyone understands the cost. That night, she drove to the hospital and sat beside Yuzor, whose breathing came in soft, uneven waves. She told him nothing and everything, resting her head on his chest. "I'm stepping into darkness," she whispered, "but I won't let it swallow me." He squeezed her fingers weakly, a wordless blessing from the man who had always seen her clearest. The morning he died was painfully ordinary. Nurses changed sheets. A radio murmured, "High life in the corridor." A cleaner's bucket clinked against a doorframe. Amaka was spooning custard into Yuzor's mouth, teasing a smile out of him for eating like a stubborn child. Then his eyes drifted to the window and stayed there, soft, distant, full of a light she could not touch. The monitors kept time the way ocean waves do, inevitable, uncaring. The line went flat, a nurse rushed in, another followed. Hands moved with practiced urgency, but the room had already become a museum. Everything in it turned into memory. Grief did not arrive as a scream. It came as collapse. Amaka folded over the bed and sobbed into the sheet where his warmth was slipping away. Bargaining with a god she wasn't sure still took her calls. She called no one. She signed papers with a hand that didn't feel like hers. She sat in the courtyard staring at a frangipani tree and thought about the first time Yuzor had sketched her. Charcoal smudged on his cheek. That ridiculous grin when he showed her a portrait that looked more honest than any mirror. The world went on. Patients argued, generators hummed, traffic barked outside, while inside her, an era ended. At home, she opened the trunk where he kept canvases that weren't ready for the world. On the top lay a new painting, her, in a black suit, eyes lifted, a thin crown of light floating just above her head, not touching, as if waiting for her permission. On the back he'd scrawled, "Live boldly, live free." She pressed the canvas to her chest and cried until her body emptied out. Then she placed the painting on the wall, sat on the floor beneath it, and let night pass without sleeping. By dawn, her breathing had learned a new, quieter rhythm. Loss would live with her, but it would not command her. The day after the funeral, the Osayande group missed a debt covenant. Lenders circled like sharks that smelled a storm. A press leak called the company a sinking rig. Amaka walked into the boardroom dressed in dark blue, hair braided back, a notebook under her arm. No entourage, no perfume, no patience. "We are filing for creditor protection under restructuring provisions," she announced. "Voluntary, controlled, surgical," a director scoffed. "You'll kill investor confidence." She looked him in the eye. "Confidence is already dead. I'm here to resuscitate the patient, not flatter the corpse. She split the conglomerate into 3 units: upstream extraction, midstream logistics, downstream retail. She ring-fenced the healthy assets, quarantined the infected contracts, and initiated a short-term standstill with banks in exchange for an independent monitor she handpicked. Then she opened a town hall for employees, no glossy slides, just truth. Payroll will be met, health cover stays, promotions freeze for now. If you have information on fraud, there is a protected channel and a reward. If you do your job, I will do mine. The applause was not loud, but it was real. In the weeks that followed, anonymous tips flooded the hotline. Patterns that had been rumors solidified into evidence. A procurement head resigned to spend time with family, then met EFCC officers at his gate. A trucking vendor confessed to billing for fleets that never moved. The drains began to close. Grief turned into fuel. Each morning she visited Yuzor's painting for a minute of stillness. Then she went to war. Her phone never slept. She ate at her desk, lost track of time zones, and learned which lawyers returned calls at midnight. When the first interim report showed a path to solvency if leakages were sealed within 90 days, she printed it, circled the word solvency, and pinned it above her screen. For the first time in months, hope wasn't a theory. It was math. Her father called at 2:14 a.m., his voice a worn-out drum. "They say you're pushing me out." She sat in the dark office, city lights scattered like beads on velvet beyond the glass. "I'm protecting the company," she replied. "You can keep your name. You can't keep your seat." Silence stretched, heavy with the history they never healed. "I built this," he said finally, pride and pleading tangled together. "You built it on people you thought would never talk," she answered. "They're talking." She hung up before nostalgia could soften her spine. The emergency board meeting ran hot. Lawyers outlined the findings. Auditors confirmed systemic manipulation. The independent monitor recommended immediate leadership change. Her father's loyalists tried to filibuster with sentiment and selective amnesia. Amaka let them. When they finished, she placed a single document on the table, a resolution to remove Chief Osayande as executive chairman and transition him to a ceremonial role pending legal outcomes. "Vote," she said. One by one, hands rose, some reluctantly, some with relief, one with a tremor that looked like regret. The motion carried. The crown did not fall. It was lifted off, gently, finally. She did not celebrate. Power isn't champagne, it's responsibility with teeth. After the meeting, she stood alone in the corridor and breathed until her pulse slowed. Burn the throne, keep the people. That was her mantra. She signed an internal memo that banned gift contracts, mandated open tenders, and published executive compensation transparently for the first time in company history. By morning, the stock, battered and bruised, stopped bleeding. Investors hate uncertainty more than bad news. Amaka had given them a plan, a spine, and a clock. 90 days to prove the ship could still float. She rolled her shoulders, picked up her pen, and got back to work. She visited her father at the old mansion, not as a daughter seeking blessing, but as a steward closing a chapter. The compound held its breath, guards stiff, fountains whispering, portraits of triumph watching from gold frames. He waited in the study, diminished but defiant, a lion remembering jungles that no longer existed. "You think this is justice?" he said, bypassing hello. "You humiliated me before the world." Amaka remained standing. "No, Baba, you humiliated yourself. I just turned on the lights." He tried to rise, failed, and settled back with a wince that made him human again. "I did what I had to keep us powerful," he muttered. "Power feeds enemies." She moved closer, not enough to be within reach. Power without conscience eats its own children. He stared at her, something like recognition dawning. The realization that the daughter he disowned had grown into the leader he once pretended to be. "I was wrong," he said, voice frayed. The apology landed between them like a fragile bird. She wanted to pick it up. She also wanted to let it fly away. "I know," she answered softly, "but I'm not here for forgiveness. I'm here for boundaries." She placed a folder on the table. Visitation protocols, legal counsel notes, A private allowance that would keep him comfortable without letting him meddle. "You will have dignity," she said, "and distance." He looked at the papers, then at her. "Do you still hate me?" The truth surprised her as it arrived. "No, I'm done hating. It costs too much." She turned to leave, paused at the door and added, "I loved a man who taught me that freedom is choosing what you carry. I'm choosing the company, the workers, and myself." Outside, the evening air felt lighter. She walked to her car and did not look back. Some doors closed without slamming. And 3 days after the leadership change, Amaka stood on a dusty oil field in Bielsa, hard hats secured, boots sinking into the soft earth. The rigs stood like tired sentinels, metal bones creaking under years of neglect. "We used to be proud here," an older engineer told her, wiping sweat from his brow. Then contracts went to the highest briber, not the best worker. She listened without interruption, taking notes in a weathered journal. There was no PR team here, no cameras, just her and the people who kept the oil flowing. Back in Lagos, she summoned the heads of logistics, safety, and human resources. The meeting room was small compared to the grand boardroom she avoided now. "This is our priority list," she said, pointing to a whiteboard. "Safety compliance, equipment audits, wage arrears clearance." She cut executive perks to fund hazard pay for field workers. Bonuses for the top tier were frozen until the bottom tier salaries were caught up. It was an unpopular move among some in leadership, but the rank and file began to feel a shift. For the first time in years, they saw someone willing to eat last. Within 2 months, injury rates dropped by 20%. Local contractors, long sidelined for foreign firms, were rehired. She made site visits weekly, showing up unannounced, talking to welders, cooks, and guards. "Your work feeds families," she told them. "That makes it sacred." Her words spread faster than press releases ever could. Slowly, the company began to shed its old skin. It started as a nickname whispered in the canteens, Madam Amaka. It was neither sarcastic nor forced. It was affectionate, protective. In Port Harcourt, workers pooled money to present her with a locally woven wrapper as thanks for reinstating their hazard allowances. She wore it the next day in the Lagos office, walking past stunned executives in Italian suits. "This is my uniform now," she quipped. She insisted on transparency in every deal. Procurement contracts were published internally. Bribes disguised as facilitation fees were rejected outright. Some vendors tried to test her resolve. One offered her a diamond bracelet in exchange for a signed renewal. She returned it in front of witnesses, attaching a note. "We are no longer in that business." Word traveled fast. But being of the people also meant carrying their burdens. When a fire broke out in a Warri depot, killing 2 workers, she flew down herself, met the families, and pledged full compensation plus educational scholarships for their children. She didn't delegate grief, she stood in it with them. By now, her leadership style was no longer questioned. It was studied. Business schools called for interviews. Journalists begged for profiles. She declined most. "I'm not here to inspire," she told her small team. "I'm here to repair." But in break rooms and barracks, workers told each other a different story. The Osayande daughter, who was nothing like her father, who drank their water, ate their food, and remembered their names. The quarterly results arrived on a humid Thursday morning. Amaka sat alone when the CFO walked in, a grin breaking through his usually tense face. "We're profitable," he said simply. The words were a sunrise after years of night. The restructuring had worked. Leakages sealed, debt obligations met ahead of schedule, investor confidence returning. But the numbers told another story too. They showed that honesty, long dismissed as weakness in the oil sector, could actually be a competitive edge. Contracts once won through bribery were now secured through efficiency and safety records. Turnover rates among skilled staff dropped sharply. New graduates actually sought positions with Osayande Energy. The news spread like Harmattan fire. Workers in Bielsa held a small party with fufu and palm wine. In Lagos, clerks baked a cake with 90 days and rising, piped in shaky icing. Amaka joined them briefly, smiling as someone handed her a paper crown from a birthday store. She put it on for exactly 3 minutes before setting it on a shelf. "The curse isn't broken because we're rich again," she told her team that evening. It's broken because we are clean again. For the first time, she allowed herself a quiet evening with no work emails, no crisis calls, just tea, Yuzor's painting on the wall, and the knowledge that she had kept her word to herself. She had not been swallowed by the darkness. The morning sun lit up the Lagos skyline as Amaka stood in front of the High Court Registry building, a simple manila folder tucked under her arm. Inside was the legal petition she had labored over for months, not to protect her father's name, but to shed it. The surname Osayande had been both a crown and a chain. It opened doors but also cast shadows over every step she took. She wanted to walk unshadowed. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, scanned the papers. New surname, she asked? Yes, Amaka replied. Just Amakai, no middle name, no family name. The woman chuckled softly. That's rare. Amaka smiled faintly. So is freedom. By afternoon, the change was official. The press would speculate endlessly about what it meant, some calling it a rejection of her father, others claiming it was branding genius. But for her, it was simpler. She was no longer an extension of a man's legacy. She was her own. That evening, she signed her first contract under her new name, sealing a joint venture with a renewable energy startup. As she inked the last page, she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she was not acting out of defiance or duty. She was acting out of choice. It was at a clean energy summit in Abuja that she ran into Tunde Adebayo, a man she had known back in her university days. He was now the CEO of a successful solar power company, tall and confident, with the same warm laugh she remembered. They caught up over hibiscus tea, their conversation flowing with an ease that surprised her. He praised her restructuring work and suggested they explore a partnership to supply hybrid power systems to oil communities, transitioning to greener solutions. Over the next few weeks, their meetings shifted from boardrooms to casual dinners. Tunde had a way of listening without trying to fix her, of seeing her without measuring her against her past. Still, Amaka moved cautiously. She had learned that proximity could be as dangerous as it was comforting. One night, after presenting a joint proposal to a group of investors, Tunde walked her to her car. Amaka, he said quietly, I know business brought us back together, but I'd be lying if I said that's all I want. She looked at him for a long moment, her guard wavering. I don't know if I have anything left to give, she admitted. He smiled gently. Then let's just start with what you have. Weeks later, the Lagos Art Museum announced a special posthumous exhibition, Yuzor Chaik, The Final Works. Amaka hesitated to attend, unsure if her heart could survive the weight of those colors again. But she went, wearing a simple white dress, her hair loose, the way Yuzor used to paint her. The first room was full of his early pieces, chaotic, vibrant, hungry. The second was quieter, his mid-career reflections on city life. And then came the last room, 12 portraits of her. Each one captured a different Amaka, the defiant girl in Yaba, the weary woman beside a hospital bed, the leader in a boardroom, the dreamer staring at a distant horizon. In the final painting, she stood barefoot on a beach, a thin crown of gold light above her head. Not touching, just waiting. Critics wept, collectors bid millions, but Amaka saw none of that. She saw Yuzor's love crystallized in paint, untainted by wealth or war. She left the gallery quietly, the night air smelling of rain, carrying the certainty that no matter where life led her, she had been seen, truly seen, once in her life. And that was enough to keep walking forward. The headline broke quietly one Tuesday morning. Amaka becomes Africa's first billionaire from ethical energy. There were no champagne corks, no lavish parties, just a balance sheet confirming that her stake in Osayande Energy, combined with her renewable ventures, had crossed the billion-dollar threshold. The world wanted to romanticize it, to make it a fairy tale about the disowned daughter who rose from the ashes. But Amaka knew it wasn't a fairy tale. It was blood, sleepless nights, and choosing the hard road over and over. Her assistant burst into her office waving a newspaper. "We should celebrate," she said. Amaka smiled, but her eyes drifted to Yuzor's painting on the wall. "We already did," she replied softly. She poured herself a cup of tea and went right back to reviewing a proposal for rural electrification in Ondo State. To her, the milestone was less about the money and more about what it represented. Proof that integrity could compete with greed and win. Later that evening, she called a staff meeting, not to announce her personal wealth, but to declare a profit-sharing program for all permanent employees. "If we grow together," she told them. The applause this time was loud, thunderous, and for the first time she allowed herself to stand there and take it in. No guilt, no shadows, just the simple truth that she had earned every drop of this moment. Months later, she was invited to deliver the keynote at the Global Ethics in Energy Summit in Geneva. Standing before a sea of executives, activists, and policymakers, she began without notes. "Legacy," she said, "is not what you inherit, it's what you heal. A family name, a fortune, a title. These mean nothing if they are built on broken backs and stolen futures." She spoke of her father without venom, framing him as a cautionary tale. She spoke of the workers in Bielsa, of the mothers in Wari, of the engineers who fix broken rigs without bribes. She challenged oil giants to see the shift coming, not as a threat, but as a chance to lead differently. And when she finished, the standing ovation wasn't for her alone. It was for the possibility of a new kind of industry leader. Afterward, a young woman from Kenya approached her with tears in her eyes. "I thought I had to choose between my values and success," she said. "You've shown me I don't." Amaka smiled. "You never did. The world just made you think so." That night, she walked along the banks of Lake Geneva, wind in her hair, feeling lighter than she had in years. The news came by phone. Her father had died in his sleep. No scandal, no courtroom drama, just the quiet end of a man whose shadow had once covered her world. The funeral was a grand affair, attended by politicians, tycoons, and distant relatives who hadn't visited him in decades. She arrived alone, dressed in a plain black wrapper, her head tied with a simple gel. As the eulogies rolled on, painting him as a visionary, a titan, she listened without correction. She wasn't there to rewrite history. When it was her turn, she walked to the casket, placed a single white rose on its polished surface, and whispered, "I carried what was worth carrying. The rest stays here with you." Then she stepped back, letting his sons from his second marriage take the front row. Outside the church, reporters thrust microphones in her face. "Will you speak about your father's legacy?" one asked. She paused, met their gaze, and said, "Legacies are complicated. Sometimes the best way to honor them is to change them." And with that, she walked to her car and left without looking back. A month later, she took a weekend trip to Badagry, alone. She walked along the beach at dawn, the tide whispering against the shore, the horizon blurring into silver. She slipped off her sandals, feeling the wet sand under her feet, and let the wind pull her hair loose. This was not the crown her father had envisioned for her, the corporate throne, the name engraved in gold. This was quieter, lighter. It was the freedom to wake up and choose her battles, to give without bargaining, to rest without guilt. She sat on a rock watching fishermen pull in their nets and thought of Yuzor's final painting, the crown of light that hovered, waiting. She smiled and closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. Somewhere in the rhythm of the waves, she felt the truth settle into her bones. She had not just survived her father's curse. She had rewritten it into something that could never again be used to bind her. The crown was hers now, not because it was given, but because she had made it with her own hands. And this time it fit perfectly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more timeless tales. See you next time.